Deputies, good morning. Meeting. As you can see, I'm a bit short-staffed today, so be kind, please. Chief Executive Gillian Merron has gone to Israel for a meeting of a government-sponsored initiative in Israel called the Global Coalition for Israel, and it was important that she be there together with leading professionals from other world communities. So although it was unfortunate that it clashed with the board meeting and it was only arranged in the last few days, she's there batting for us today. I would also like to offer immediately, you'll see the space, Marie van der Zyl, Vice President, lost her father yesterday. On your behalf, I would like to offer wishes of Chai Maruchim, long life, to Marie. The arrangements are not yet known, but I know that all of you will wish to join me in expressing sympathy to her and to her family. Also, Richard Verber had an appendicitis issue this week and had his appendix out. He's at home recovering from the operation. He is, I believe, watching the live feed today, so can we all wave and say, hello, Richard?
Hello, Richard.
And Richard, we all wish you a refuah shalema. Couple of personal matters. On the Mazel Tov, I'd like to wish Roger Winfield Mazel Tov on the occasion of the birth of his first grandson, who I think is called Oscar. Have I got that right, Roger, if he's here? Is that a yes? Thank you. And to Vice President Sheila and Roger Giwob on the occasion of the bar mitzvah of their grandson Matthew. It's about to take place. To Dr. Gillian Gertner, Deputy for Finchley Federation, on the occasion of the engagement of her son, Josh, to the granddaughter of past President Joe Wagerman and Peter Wagerman. Mazel tov to them. Mazel tov to Pinner Deputy John Carlish on the arrival of the grandson in Kansas City. And also, I think we should wish Mazel Tov to the mother of Robert Stone, who has reached her 103rd birthday. I'd also like to add refuah shalema wishes to Susan Conway following her recent operation, and to Noam Tamir following his recent operation. And as you may have read in the Jewish news, Noam's son donated, was it a kidney to his father to enable a liver transplant, very serious operation, and he's given his father a new life. Absolutely wonderful, inspirational story. A couple of deputies will be resigning. Peter Bayfus, Deputy for Bournemouth Reform, for personal reasons, and I look forward to meeting Peter's successor soon. And I'd also like to say au revoir, but not goodbye, to Avril Lapin, the Deputy for Allerton, who's played an important part in the board and for her community in Liverpool. Avril, you will be missed. I hope very much you'll find a place to remain as one way or the other. And thank you, who perhaps might wave from over the table there between the microphones, who has given us his technical assistance at every meeting for live streaming, giving very, very generously of his time, and it's working well. Thank you very much, Leo. I've also been told that in the last day or so, Samuel Willenberg, aged 93, died in Israel. He's one of only 67 persons known to have survived the concentration camp at Treblinka, and he is the last survivor. And it's a reminder that as the generation of Holocaust survivors diminishes, so it will be all the more challenging for us to ensure that their memory and their experiences are duly remembered and never denied or minimized. Deputies, turning to my statement, I wish to first say something about Martin Frey. Martin was the board's Director of Administration, and he worked at the board for some 6-7 years. He was a very, very popular member of staff. I had personally known him for many years before that as a member of my community in Boreham Wood. And as the board's staff community and officers are a small community, and his loss was deeply felt. Martin was one of those people who was always willing to help deputies, whatever their query, good, bad, or indifferent. He always had a smile and a kind word for deputies. He had a very droll sense of humour, but you had to know him well to hear. But what most people didn't know is that his enormous modesty. He spent most of his working life working for our community. One of the things that he did that not many knew about was that he would, at request, lane an entire cedra for the shul. Although he seemed to be a very shy man, he would take himself upstairs and he would work for days and master a cedra, and he would lane any cedra that you asked of him in Boreham Wood Shul, where we have very good standards and no shortage of ballet Corée, but he was one of the best. I want to send all our sympathies to his widow Vivienne and to his sons, who are only 20 or 21. Martin's life was taken from him at the early age of 60 when he was cut down by a terrible illness. I just want to remember him, and you will remember him. We've had about 50 messages from deputies which are being bound up and will be presented to his family. And so I say to Avram Menashe ben Nachman Dov, may he be remembered for a blessing, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. There was an announcement this week by the government which received a wide welcome, not only in this country, but across the world, and not limited to the Jewish world. And it was that steps are to be taken at a legislative level against boycotts of Israel. The government's words were themselves that boycotts taken by local authorities and public bodies are harmful to community cohesion, and we know that very well indeed from the way we feel when discriminatory action is taken against Israel based on politically motivated and ill-founded considerations. And Matthew Hancock, the Cabinet Office Minister, who led the delegation to Israel this week, wrote a piece in the Jewish Chronicle about the measures, which I commend to you. And please note that he pays tribute, first to the Board of Deputies and the CST and Jewish Human Rights Watch and the JC for keeping this issue to the fore. And we appreciate Minister Matthew Hancock's thanks. It is indeed an issue that is of great concern to our community. Anyone want to comment on that matter? I think Bernard Silver wanted to. Now, deputies, we've got a new arrangement which you had some foreknowledge of. The microphone is here to the front. The reason is that there are some deputies who need to lip read. In fact, the deputies we're aware of, and we took quite a few soundings after the last meeting, can't themselves be present today. But what we're planning to have is to have, I don't want to single anyone out, but someone I was told wasn't here is now here. If we had known, we would have put the live feed up on the internet behind, which would make it easier still. And we hope to do that for future meetings. But we hope, anyway, we'll receive all feedback. Bernard Silver.
Bernard Silver, Western Marble Arch Synagogue. I share your welcome for this wish to have legislation, but it's a very thin end of a very thin wedge. The first introduction of an anti-boycott bill was in the House of Lords in 1976, so 39 years ago, by the late lamented Lord Byers. And inevitably, the one person who's rushed in to say this is a conservative plot to introduce conservative ideas into local councils and local bodies and government bodies, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, had to oppose. But the fact is that it was not a Labour introduction in the first place 39 years ago, nor was it a Conservative one. In fact, Lord Byers was the president of the Liberal Party at that time, the forerunners of the Liberal Democrats. And the point I want to make is that it only stops at government bodies and local council bodies. It's a sort of, it's a very minor way of trying to tackle what is a very big problem. We need anti-boycott legislation on our statute book, as other countries have, notably Australia, because every businessman who has been faced with having to go to a notary and sign a notarial certificate, or at least have a notarial certificate that he is complying with the Arab boycott, and get that to the Foreign Office, who have to issue their apostille to say they know who he was. All this nonsense has to be stopped, and it's that's 2.5, or is it 4?
We're getting out of time, Bernard. So
Okay.
conclude.
Inevitably, what we need is a much further-reaching, far-reaching anti-boycott legislation in this country, and I really challenge all the parliamentarians who are on this board and those who are not on this board, for one of them to have the courage to introduce it. Thank you.
Susan Pascoe, and what I'll do is I'll suggest people come to the microphone and wait there. Richard Sassoon, thank you, and Rosalind Pine, thank you, and is that Jonathan Goldbloom I see at the back? Who's got his hand up there? This gentleman here, is it? Sorry? I can't see who it is. No, Martin Jascom, sorry. Martin, please. Yeah. And yes, I can't see whose hand it is. I can see it. Yes, please come forward. Sam, thank you. I don't know if I called you, but
you didn't mention my name, but I was standing here.
Susan Pascoe was first, and you can go after Susan. Tony.
Susan Pascoe, Israel Community. I welcome this development as an important landmark. I would like to broaden the issue with that in the next item in your statement for the Oxford University Labour Club, to remind us that one reason that the co-chair of the Oxford Labour Club resigned was that this week is Israel Apartheid Week at universities up and down the country. The term Israel Apartheid Week in itself is extremely inflammatory and provocative and makes life intolerable for students on campus. As a member of academic staff at a university, I know that students and staff dread Israel Apartheid Week, and I would urge you, Mr. President, as a priority for success in your presidency, to work with government ministers to achieve the same success we had with boycott, to achieve this success in banning Israel Apartheid Week on campus, and also urge you, obviously, to work with UJS, Stand With Us, university vice-chancellors and student unions as a priority to prevent Israel Apartheid Week taking place on campuses. Thank you very much.
Tony Cotton.
Tony Cotton, Richmond Synagogue. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. President, if you won't say a word to this meeting about the activities of the board on this subject of boycotts. This pamphlet is in draft, I think. Will you not tell us something that the board is actually doing about this?
Which is this pamphlet he's talking about?
Richard Sassoon, Spanish and Portuguese. I would just like to commend to Deputies a Radio 4 programme that was on Wednesday night this last week, The Moral Maze, which addressed the issue of boycotts. And the first witness that was called to that was a name that may be familiar to many of us, somebody called Jonathan Sacerdoti, who's a fellow deputy of mine at the S&P. And I think he gave a very robust input to that programme about about boycotts. And the programme should be available on the BBC iPlayer, and I would recommend to all deputies that you listen to that. I won't offer my opinion because I think I'd be preaching to the choir here, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, Rosalind Pine, North Salford Synagogue. I'd like to bring to the attention that this was really the initiative largely of a fellow deputy, Johnny Neumann. I'm sorry, Johnny, if I'm embarrassing you, but it's for a good cause, who, together with a few others, set up Jewish Human Rights Watch a year ago. They took action. They went and took councils to court. They took legal action. And it wasn't thanks to having nice, cozy chats, talking to people who are out to destroy us. And let's not forget, this isn't about Israel, it's about Jews. You know, if it's been that way through history, and quite coincidentally, a few weeks ago, the greatest Jewish scientist ever, Einstein's theory of general relativity was proven correct. And he made an interesting prediction, perhaps not so well known, and he said the following. He said, if relativity is proven correct, the Germans will say I'm a German, the Swiss will say I'm a Swiss citizen, and the French will call me a great scientist. If it is proven incorrect or false, the French will say I'm a German, the French will say I'm a Swiss, the Swiss will say I'm a German, and the German will call me a Jew. And that's been ever thus. And I think we should expose the hypocrisy of the boycotters who take a pick and mix view, because the truth of the matter is, without Jewish genius, we would be living in the dark ages. And people like Omar Barghouti, who was the founder of the BDS movement, born in Qatar, raised in Egypt, and enjoying a PhD in Tel Aviv University, courtesy of the Israeli taxpayer, or people like Stephen Hawking, who called for a boycott and yet can only speak through his synthetic voice box through the development of the chip developed in Israel. They should be called out for their hypocrisy, and we should remind the world that we Jews netted 28% of all Nobel Science Prizes in the last 100 years. We should remind them of that and the huge input and success of Jewish genius into the scientific and medical world.
Martin Jaskell, Hampstead Garden Suburb. I think, Mr. President, that religious anti-Semitism had a political successor in ethnic anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism in anti-Zionism. And this so-called righteous sentiment permits affectations of innocence of anti-Semitism from Oxford dons and students alike. You spoke out very, very forcibly against what happened in Oxford, which was much appreciated. Please, could you speak out as strongly on the behalf of the Jewish community against the policies espoused by Momentum and some of the cliques surrounding the leadership of the Labour Party at this time?
Sir Sam Alston, Kingston Liberal Synagogue. I join every speaker before me in agreeing that boycotts are destructive. They are against Israel. They are dangerous to the peace. They're dangerous to Israel, and we should be working to prevent them. However, I don't join these previous speakers in welcoming the guidance. It's not legislation that the government has produced. I think we should put that banning these things is not the way forward. The point of these is not that withdrawing the goods from, Lincolnshire Council going to Israel is going to make an instant difference to Israel. The point is a public statement. These councils will find, if they want to do it, another way to make the public statement. And in support of these causes. And actually, we shouldn't be banned. We should be trying to win the argument and try to make the case that these boycotts are wrong and that it's not the way to make peace, that it's not the way, and it damages Israel and it damages Palestinians. We shouldn't be supporting bans and using the extension of the hand of the government to undermine arguably democratic institutions. We should instead be trying to win the argument and we should instead be saying that these potentially undermine democratic institutions. We support democratic rights, we support these things, but we want to argue in the democratic forums against boycotts. What we do, we should, and I'm very concerned that the board is welcoming these and not saying that the aim is to prevent boycotts rather than to merely ban things.
Thank you for those contributions. I agree with almost everything that was just said. I don't agree with you, Sam. Appreciate the strength of your view. I believe that boycotts are, as I said, wholly objectionable in principle. They're often passed in a very undemocratic way. I think they are uniquely aimed at Israel. They are politically motivated. They are divisive. They stigmatize. They're objectionable on every single level. And if it needs legislative guidance in order to make them impossible to adopt, and the government wishes to state that clearly, then I, for one, am all for it, and I believe the overwhelming consensus of our community is supportive of it. Can I say that the board's pamphlet, we've been, as Cabinet Minister Matthew Hancock pointed out, proactive on this issue for some years. The board's pamphlet is called A Better Way Than Boycotts. It was in fact produced, I think, under the aegis of the Defence Division, which I chaired about 18 months to 2 years ago. The pamphlet has proved to be influential and significant, and it is now sold out, or given out, and we are producing a fresh edition. I would also like to say that to Susan, I hope that the mark of my presidency will not depend on whether Israel Apartheid Week is banned, because I'm not sure I have the power to see that it is banned. I'm with Sam on this. With something like Israel Apartheid Week, despite the fact that apartheid aimed at Israel is an absolute slur, and there have been a number of works written about it, including by South Africans who know all about apartheid, we have the ability to debate things freely on our campuses and everywhere else. And if people want to make that slur, they can, and we should defeat them on the arguments. But it goes without saying that the board will continue to work with the Union of Jewish Students and with all relevant groups in the community to combat these sorts of slurs. The fact remains, if you talk to Jewish students on campus, they are well up to the task of combating these challenges, even though they sometimes make their lives very difficult. It was like that when I was at university, when many of you were at university. I think it has got worse, but I'm fully confident in the ability and the skill of UJS to be able to put our case with conviction. Can I also remind you that just this week, or this week I think, a BDS motion was defeated at Warwick University, where we have a very small Jewish society, but the argument was won by a very, very convincing majority, and that's the best way to answer our detractors. Before I go on to the next matter, I had promised, and I want to be able to assist, if I may, to interpose Neil Taylor, the head of sport at Maccabi UK, who's a visitor here, and it's not fair to keep him here to the end of the meeting. So I want to invite him to make a very brief presentation on the Maccabi Fun Run, for which you have these flyers on your seats. Neil Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much for having me today, board members. As Jonathan Wright said, I'm the head of sport and community partnerships at Maccabi GB, and it is my fault that you have all these sheets on your seats today. The reason why I am here is to promote what we do, and one of the mechanisms that we do this is through this event. Now, as you can probably tell, I am not a local boy. I'm a Belfast lad, and Community, for me, is very different to what community might be for you. Community, to me, was getting very excited that the community could get together to order meat monthly in order to be able to get the kosher meat we needed for that month in our family. For you, it might be something different. Community means something different to all of us. The idea behind the Maccabi GB Community Fund Run is something that's quite special. We've been going for 10 years now and raised over £1 million for Jewish charities and causes around the UK and Israel. And that's something that's quite telling. Last year, 2015, we had close to 2,000 runners, walkers, wheelchair users, and people of all different abilities and ages participate in the event. Over 3,500 people were there on the day. It's one of the only events across the UK fundraising that incorporates all of the community. We had United Synagogue rabbis bound together, walking a 1K route to raise money for them. We had liberal Judaism. We had people, again, in wheelchairs and other denominations of the community. It is all-encompassing. And what I am here to do today is really very simply make you aware that the event exists. It is something that we have tried to run, and we will be trying to run across the UK to try and raise awareness. So far, in 2016, we have 53 charities and Jewish community causes who have signed up. And I implore you, if you are interested in something that you feel that your community, your synagogue, your body would be interested in being part of, like I said, we have United Synagogue, we have Reform, S&P Sephardi are there as well, and a few others. So it doesn't matter what community you came from. Like I said, from myself, my community is very different to where you came from. But in some of the messages that we've just heard, and it is a very different thing for me to be here today, community is really what we are all about. Everybody in the room represents their own individual community, but we are all about one united front for one single cause. And whatever mechanism we do that with, or whatever way we show our support, what we do and what I've been promoting is one event that brings people from across the community, across the denomination together to raise funds for causes within the community so that we can show our strength, support one another, and be united moving forward. And if anybody would like any more information, you've got the flyers on your tables. If anybody would like to speak to me, please do. But thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Neil Taylor and Maccabi, one of our great charities. The board, of course, Neil, is another place where all elements of the community come together, and indeed we have fun. And at 1:30, we all run away. After the President's statement, I would like now to announce the President's challenge. I will be running the 10K run as I did a couple of years ago, I think on my 60th birthday. This will be the day before my 62nd birthday. I will be delighted to run together with all deputies who would like... Jerry, I see a taker there. Jerry, you're on. All right. Jerry, I'm not going to name anyone's name. I'm going to invite everyone who wishes to run. We'll explore whether we can get a group together and run and raise some funds for our board. It is hugely enjoyable. If you run with me, I promise you, you won't have to run very fast. I look forward to being there. Neil, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's move on. Oxford University Labour Club. I think my statement will have read for itself, and I think we've already had a number of comments on this issue. Is there anything anyone wants to add on that issue? I think we've pretty much included it. Thank you very much. Meeting President Putin at the Kremlin, which I announced last time, and the meeting has taken place, and you've seen what I have to say about it. Yes.
Jonathan Davis, Golders Green Synagogue. Did you, at your meeting, discuss Russia's support for the Assad regime in Syria. There was some discussion, in the discussion on boycotts earlier, there was reference to inconsistency. Many of those who criticized Israel's actions in Gaza in recent years have been strangely silent in commenting on the Assad and Russian actions in Syria, which seem to amount to nothing less than war crimes.
We raised a whole range of issues over the Middle East. We did not go there, and it would have been rather difficult to go there and accuse the president of Russia of war crimes to his face at the Kremlin. As you'll have seen, the way I approached the matter, and in fact it fell to me to do this by arrangement with the other participants, was that I raised the issue of Russian weaponry in the area, in particular finding its way into the hands of Hezbollah. I won't say we got commonality on all themes, but as I say, what struck me was that this meeting was a strikingly friendly meeting, and that Chief Rabbi Lazar and the president of the Moscow community did not seek our support in raising any particular issues, and made it clear to us that you could walk the streets of Russian cities with a kippah or a Magen David and in obviously Jewish clothing, and you would not be threatened or anything like that, which is rather better than you can say for some cities in Western Europe. The fact is that Russia has a very large Jewish community, almost certainly a larger one than we have in the United Kingdom, and Russia has known decades of state-sponsored anti-Semitism, something which the president will know all about as a former member of the KGB, and it's not the case now. It's not the case now. Whether in the future things will go badly again, the history is a difficult history. But what I think is really important is that the Jewish people needs to be able to have a conversation with some of the most powerful leaders in the world and to be able to discuss things openly. And I was very proud, therefore, that on behalf of the Board of Deputies, I was able to be there present at this meeting. And I think it shows the board's own reach that we were invited to join a rather small delegation from the leading communities in Europe. Visits to communities, you'll see that I've been fairly busy in the last few weeks, and I'm going on next Shabbat to, do you want to ask on Putin, Mark? Mark Fox, sorry. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Mark Fox from West London Synagogue. Mr. President, you did completely the right thing to meet with President Putin and to express our concerns, but we always need to be aware with exactly who we are dealing with. You're right, you can walk on the streets of Moscow as a Jew, but you can't walk in large parts of Ukraine with the Ukrainian flag. You can't walk in Chechnya with the Chechnyan flag, or you will be immediately mown down. And there are a large number of other minorities across Russia who, in my professional work, I'm involved with. And I'm always very aware of the fact that we as Jews don't want to end up looking as if we're not responding to the needs and concerns of other minorities. There's a very delicate path there. And I wanted no more than to make that point, that we realise that we all walk into this with our eyes open, as it were. On a separate and slightly more concerning note, and this seems to be the right point to bring it up, as I was trying to log in, I don't know if any of the rest of you had this, the site came up, MI5 surveillance. I then tried to interrogate it, any of you who know how to interrogate sites in the source, and it immediately responded, site now hidden from view, which is of some concern. Could I ask that our security people investigate whether we can ensure that we aren't being hacked by other government organisations, and to find out why that happened? Because, as I say, the disturbing bit isn't that it came up, it's the fact that the speed at which it went into hiding when I interrogated that. Any of you who do know about the internet will know that can only happen in very, very specific situations. Mr. President, you may laugh, it's a wrong reaction to laugh to that. We all have to be careful of how we're being monitored, and the Board of Deputies of British Jews should be wary of that as well.
Obviously, it's a complete spoof, isn't it? Yes, please.
Stuart Goodman, Plymouth. President, what do you consider to have been the motive of President Putin in inviting the EJC to that meeting?
Stuart, you ask an extremely good question. He didn't tell me. I don't know. In answer to you and Mark Fox, can I just say that I gave a television interview shortly afterwards to Israeli TV where I said that we're under no illusions about President Putin, about lots of things that the Russian state does, and we're not. Ukraine, of course, is a different country, and I dare say that Russia would have no hesitation, wouldn't pull its punches about Ukraine any more than Ukrainians are about Russia. I guess that the President wanted to demonstrate publicly that he was friendly to the Jewish community locally and therefore willing to give hospitality to a delegation from Western communities. Perhaps he thought that would assist his own reputation. I don't know, though. I can't give you a better answer. On monitoring, Mark, I'm sorry I was smiling only because you reduced another deputy to helpless laughter. I suspect that anything that comes up says you're under surveillance by MI5 probably isn't MI5. Seems to be a rather unsubtle way of acting. But let me just say this. The board is up to lots of things. Whether we are up to battling against MI5, I'm not absolutely sure, but we'll look into it. Talking about regional communities, I want to pay tribute to the regional communities around this country who often work in really difficult conditions where their numbers are thin on the ground, where they are providing warm and welcoming centres for being Jewish all over this country. And I always enjoy visiting regional communities, small, large, and I will go wherever I'm invited at whatever sort of parts of the community they are. I shall be delighted to visit them if they would like. I would like to mention specifically how struck I was when I visited the community in Gateshead on the Saturday night after my Shabbat in Newcastle. I've never been there before. One of the things that struck me was that the community has doubled in size in the last 12 years to 500 families. 500 families in Gateshead terms, you're getting on for about 4,000 people, perhaps more. I asked why, and I was told that people who got married who previously would have left Gateshead are now staying, and they have critical mass, and more members of the community are working in jobs in and around Gateshead, in also a whole range of occupations. In addition to that, there are 2,000 young men and women and older ones who are studying at one of the range of educational SEMs and yeshivas in Gateshead, making up a community of something like 6,000 people, if not more. And everywhere we tend to say that our regional communities are in decline, and they are, with the exception of Manchester, and Leeds is holding its own, Gateshead has to be remembered amongst them. And indeed, its expansion is extraordinary, and I was privileged to meet the leading rabbi in Gateshead, Rav Zimmerman, who is taking the community into new areas of engagement and outward looking, but also without compromising any of its ideals. I also met the head of the yeshiva, Rav Gurovitz, and I was entertained to a Malava Malka, to a rabbi in Gateshead who I had met when I joined his minyan from where I was on holiday in the Lake District last year, where I wanted to say Kaddish. And if you look in the Jewish Tribune, you find a Jewish holiday minyan map, and if you're in need of a minyan in the Yorkshire Dales of the Lake District, you could probably find half a dozen. And I was very, very struck by the cohesiveness and the organisation and the increasing size of Gateshead, and of course by its staunch adherence to Torah values. And I think it is a really, really commendable, interesting place and I greatly enjoyed my visit there. And this Shabbat I'm due to be in St John's Wood, and I thank our deputies from there who facilitated my visit. And a week after that, I shall be going to North Manchester. And after that, to Kingston-on-Thames. Andrew Gilbert.
Yeah, Andrew Gilbert, UJIA. It is exactly on the point of the regional communities that I'm particularly worried at the moment. Each year I have the experience as people apply for Go on Israel Tour at 16 to watch somewhere between 1,100 and 1,300 applications come in. However, this year the number from the regions outside of Manchester and actually outside of South Hertfordshire and North London are at the lowest they've ever been. In some cases, and there's been a general collapse. In 2000, we saw 398 people go on tour who were from outside of North London and South Hertfordshire. The number this year has gone down to under 250. There are communities like Birmingham where this year no one is going on Israel tour from any of the synagogues there. There are communities like Brighton where no one is going on tour. There are communities like Bournemouth, I think it's one, Cardiff, one, and there are communities which have just about fallen apart, it seems, in terms of their application. I make this plea through you, Mr. President, but also to deputies as a whole. I believe there are 16-year-olds out there who could go on tour. All the tours still have places, just about, although some are nearly full. We're already on 1,150 overall. We wouldn't expect more than 1,250. So tour is nearly, we're talking about the ones and twos. But in those communities, it makes a huge difference to those people. And I urge us to do everything we can as deputies to see whether we can find those people in regional communities who perhaps didn't know about it or didn't know anyone that was going, and actually see that this is a case where individual deputies can make a difference. I don't know any other forum in this community where there are people who come from those communities. And I ask you to go back to your community, talk to people, and talk to your rabbi, because we're not getting traction on this at the moment. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ilana Davis. I'm from Birmingham Progressive Synagogue. I'm the Under 35 Observer representative. I want to reiterate what the gentleman before me just said, and it's that young people in the community is just really important. But I also wanted to give a glimmer of hope, because in liberal Judaism youth, we actually have quite a large number from Birmingham that tend to go on Israel tour. So it's not just UJIA that send Israel tours, there's also other movements, and liberal Judaism seems to be doing pretty well, especially in Birmingham.
Thank you very much, Ilana and Andrew. Well, you heard their plea. Those of you from whatever communities you come, perhaps you would take back to your communities the concern that numbers of young people from the communities may not be joining tour where previously they did. And please will you speak to the chair and the rabbis of your communities and see whether in fact more could be done to spread the word to young people, because as all of us know whose children have been through tour, it's absolutely formative experience, and it has to be encouraged. Northern Ireland Manifesto. On Monday, I spent the day in Belfast. This has never been done before. I particularly want to say... I misspoke. The board has never had a day visiting, not that in living memory or my memory, perhaps one of the past presidents will correct me, and I don't remember a day where the board has met all the community leaders in politics in Belfast at Stormont. And with us we took the chair and the treasurer of the Belfast Jewish community, who have generally, and for very understandable reasons, been very cautious in their dealings with local politicians, particularly at times of very great tension and indeed violence within the memory of many of the people here. To those who have said before, is it worth having a manifesto? I'm sorry I don't have a copy with me. It's a short but punchy document, and it provided and provides a set of key talking points for the Jewish community, with politicians in areas like Northern Ireland, where there aren't large Jewish communities, but the Jewish communities there have played a significant role, and there are many distinguished personalities who are known and recognised and respected. And it gives us a place from which we can speak about key issues. And they're not issues just about Jews, although some are. They're all issues about how society functions. For example, dealing with Israel matters, dealing with boycotts. Going to extend the community's reach in areas it hasn't been to before. And that was very apparent to me in Northern Ireland. And I think the very tiny financial investment in the manifesto was undoubtedly repaid dividends many times over. And it also gave, I think, some strengthening and confidence to the local community. I was very, very pleased to be able to do it. And on your behalf, extend our community's reach to Northern Ireland. Any questions on that? A number of you have come up who now don't live in Northern Ireland but came from there and said to me that they appreciated that we were there. All right, now, oh, sorry. Yes, Karen. That's not the Belfast one, I think. There was a specific one for Northern Ireland, but thank you very much. Linda, did you want to say something on this? You'll have to come up to the microphone, please.
Linda Sharp, Kinloss Gardens, Finchley Synagogue. Just to say it's Northern Ireland related, but I just wanted to say a thanks should be given to Stephen Jaffa. He does such a lot of work. I don't know whether he's here today, but there's a program we record every Friday night called the Revelation Channel, which thanks to Lionel Koplowitz we watched, which has a lot of Jewish issues. And Stephen was on, I saw it on Saturday last night, Stephen was on Friday talking about anti-Semitism and boycott and everything, and he's very, very involved. And I think, coming from Northern Ireland, he also deals a lot with the Northern Ireland community. So I'm sure you're aware of the work that he does.
Thank you. Well said. Quite right. And Stephen was of enormous help. And the amazing thing was, walking around the corridors of Stormont, every single person there knew him. Superb worker and networker. And finally, what I'm sure you've all been waiting for, the meeting with the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. Much reported on, summarised here. I dare say there may be some questions and comments. I'm very happy to take them. Yes, at the back, as Louise. It is Louise, isn't it? Yes. Flo? I'll call on people, and please go to the microphone. Louise is first, and Eric Mooman, thank you very much.
Flo Kaufman. Thank you, Mr. President. Flo Kaufman, Hampstead Garden Suburb. The President and Chief Executive are no doubt aware that Labour Party policy is determined by conference and not the party leader. Would the President please explain why he requested a meeting with Jeremy Corbyn, given his known associates, and did the Labour leader manage to say the word Israel at any time during the encounter? It's worth noting that there has not been a reported audience with Her Majesty the Queen. Why the audience with the President?
Louise.
Louise Ellman, MP, Jewish Labour Movement. I warmly welcome the meeting that took place with Jeremy Corbyn. I think it's extremely important that dialogue with the Leader of the Opposition is established and is maintained over a whole range of issues that affect the Jewish community, including Israel, which of course affects everybody. And it's also important to note that there are a lot of activists in the Labour Party, and including MPs, who do not agree with Jeremy Corbyn's stance on Israel. And I'm concerned that there was clearly ambiguity in terms of his position on future boycotts. Boycotts, as we've already discussed this morning, are wrong. They are divisive. And the boycott campaigns in relation to the West Bank are actually part of the Palestine Solidarity campaign's overall campaign to have a boycott on the whole of Israel. And that must be resisted. And that is done best by building bridges as well, outside of official meetings with a wide variety of people, including Labour Party members, including other communities as well, who very often have similar views, but I don't think that we work with enough. And I think we need to keep reiterating our support for a two-state solution to this very tragic and dreadful conflict, which I still do not think is impossible in a rapidly changing Middle East with a lot of changes in surrounding states and regional alliances. But overall, I welcome the meeting that took place, and I hope that more meetings follow.
Eric Moonman, Belsize Square Synagogue. I follow very much what Louise has said with some sympathy, but I think there's more to it. And I say this as a former colleague. The thing is that it's natural that when an officer of the board meets any representative, whether it's Putin or whether it's the leader of the Labour Party, that one should feel the mission accomplished. That's not a criticism. But I think it's very important that in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, which is a very sensitive and complex issue, I think that we should be prepared to follow it up. Of course there was ambiguity, and of course that he said that he would go along and not damage the interests of Jewish people. You know, this was comfortable. And so many other people in the same situation would do exactly the same. He's in the business of politics. But I think we should go a stage further, and I think it behoves the President to ensure that we use the occasion over the next 12 months to provide information to him on a direct basis, not just a leaflet, but the President should sign a letter, maybe just a single page, highlighting some of the excesses of the subjects that worry us. He's getting briefing from a group of people that really don't have a great deal of time for Israel and possibly the Jewish community. We've got to put that right, and we do it on a continuous basis. And I think a criticism that many of us have had in the past as officers is that we were pleased to have the meeting, and that's the end of it. Can't be. It's too serious. And I think we've got to do that, and we've got to make sure that where there are occasions that we can have an additional meeting, that's necessary. But provide briefings, because there were serious ambiguities which he did not raise. He talked about, I'll reflect on it. We must use the occasion. And the final thought is, I think the President would be wise to have one or two people with him at the next meeting who have got associations with the Labour Party, and there's no reason why that, in fact, that Louise shouldn't be attending that meeting as well. People in a negotiation are impressed with who's sitting on the other side. It's no disrespect to you, Mr. President, however hard you try, but you and the General Secretary isn't quite the balance.
Alvin.
Malvin Benjamin, Hendon United Synagogue. I'd like to commend you, Mr. President, for attending this meeting and putting the point so forcibly to Mr. Corbyn. But as Eric has indicated, that really isn't the end of the matter. I mean, there is sterling work being done by those who support Israel, particularly Louise Ellman in Parliament. But there are various movements that have an ingrained hostility towards Israel and, by extension, the Jewish community. I'm talking about Momentum, which was mentioned in passing by Martin Jaskell earlier. These people are policymakers so far as Mr. Corbyn is concerned, and they have to be watched very carefully and very forcibly. So, Mr. President, well done for attending the meeting, but it's only the beginning of the matter and not the end. And you have to press, if I may respectfully suggest, you have to press Mr. Corbyn on the matters of which he was, to put it mildly, ambiguous. And you have to press Mr. Corbyn on the role of organizations like Momentum, who have this hostility towards Israel and, by extension, the Jewish community. Once again, well done, Mr. President. You've done very well in the term that you have attended the board so far, and may we see this to continue more and more and longer and longer. Thank you, Mr. President.
Carol Abrahams, Catford and Bromley. It's just a question that a few people have put to me, sort of around the community, and that is, you know, good for Jonathan for meeting with Jeremy Corbyn. Jonathan put out a press release afterwards, I think a couple of press releases, and very good they were as well. Did Jeremy Corbyn put out a press release? And if not, did the Labour Party put out a press release? And if not, was any suggestion made of the two of you putting out a joint press release?
Bruce Greenberg from Northampton Hebrew Congregation. Mr. President, after your meeting with the leader of the opposition, do you feel that Mr. Corbyn can be trusted?
Well, thank you very much for all of those questions. If anything, they were a little bit understated. First of all, I want to make it clear there was nothing ambiguous about what Jeremy Corbyn said on the negative aspects which I highlighted. He appears to support a boycott of settlement goods, and he refused to be drawn on meetings he's had with Holocaust deniers and anti-Semites and terrorists. And we pressed him, and we pressed him, and we pressed him. Gillian Meron and I, if anything, Gillian Meron, very strong, stronger than me. She's a former Labour minister and Member of Parliament for 13 years. She has very strong associations and commitments to the Labour Party, whereas I don't have any associations or commitments with any political party. And all we got from Jeremy Corbyn was a promise to reflect. I do not regard that as being particularly ambiguous. I regarded that as being unhelpful. But the important thing is that I said so. And I've said so clearly, and I've said it again here. He could and should have done more. He did not provide satisfactory answers. So there's no question, Eric, that we consider mission accomplished. I'd also like to say, I can't answer you, Flo, as to whether or not the Leader of the Opposition has had an audience with the Queen, and if not, why he had an audience with me first. You can draw your own inferences. But I want to say also to Eric, you're right that we should be providing information on a direct basis and have people with me. Well, I had Gillian Meron with me, and that was a great part of how we secured this invitation to meet him. I, of course, will have everyone in mind in the future who may accompany me on future visits, and Louise is extremely welcome. It was clear to us that at an initial meeting we needed to have a smaller group so that we could have direct, no holds barred conversations, and we did. Carol, yes indeed, the Labour leader put out a press release, and it was indeed his press release, which was quite widely reported, which indicated, alongside with ours, what he viewed the meeting was about, and of course it was a slightly more positive one than ours. But yes, there was a press release, and it was largely in satisfactory terms. Bruce, when you say, do I trust, can he be trusted? You know, politicians are politicians. And I would simply say, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is too much different, but this is the main message I want to give to people. You know, there's no disguising the fact that the Leader of the Opposition has views which are deeply troubling to the Jewish community, and not just the Jewish community, obviously. As Louise said, they're troubling to large parts of Labour as well. But you know, we can't ignore the leader of the opposition. What you have to do with people, especially people who've never spoken to people coming from where we have before, is that you have to start a conversation. You have to try and build confidence and trust. You make what you hope will be a gain in understanding, and you build on it. And then you build on it the next time. So one of the requests we made was that we meet him again in 6 months' time. And he said yes. And I hope we'll have that meeting. And I hope we'll somehow manage to advance the process of understanding. I'm very grateful to many people in Labour who've said to me they thought that we achieved more than they expected we might at our initial meeting. I think it very important that on your behalf, the Jewish community, we were able to have this meeting with the leader of the opposition, who's come from a place that's miles away from things we believe, and move the process of trust and I hope understanding forward. And it may be that we'll never get to a place that we would like to be, but I'm certainly going to try. And even if we don't, it's absolutely crucial that we make the arguments to him. And he may be the leader of the party, but in just the same way as the Prime Minister hasn't got everyone with him on some vital issues, including, as reported this weekend. So the leader of the Labour Party in any party doesn't always have people around him who think the same way. So this is the political process, and the Jewish community has to be there, and I'm proud that we took the Jewish community there, and we made the arguments very clearly to him. And he has some really difficult views for us, but they're often views because he's never been informed by people, for example, with a different narrative about the Middle East. Hasn't spoken to them before. Now he has, and I hope that we will be able, productively, I hope, to continue that conversation. Who? Yeah. Jerry, we finished the questions on this matter. Did you want to add something on this particular matter? I will indulge you on this occasion. But while you're walking up, Jerry... Sorry? At the end, perhaps. Tal Fair's question, I've answered it. Tal, did you have anything to add to that question? Thank you very much. Gary Mond... Gary, I've answered your question. I'm increasingly asked whether there is a Jewish angle to the debate about whether we should be in or out of Europe. And as I've said here, my mind is not fully made up on the main issue, but at the moment, and I'm prepared to be persuaded, I don't see a particular Jewish communal angle. I think that we can see things that have come out of Europe we don't agree with, but I'm not able to say that things may never come out of British foreign policy if we were alone that we wouldn't agree with, where Europe might actually be helpful. So I don't think at the moment that the board should be taking a position on it, and we're not. But Gary, do you want to come and take the place? Anyone else want to speak on that question? Yes, you come and... What's his name? Flo, do you want to speak on this issue? Just take the place in the queue, please, all right? And Jerry, you go first.
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. Mr. President, I won't do any more on the Corbyn meeting itself, besides saying thank you for doing it in the way you've done it and the way you've publicised it. But there's a very salient point which has come out of your subsequent comments, which I think need slight reflection. There are some of us who have been on this board a long time. Some of us may think that's a good idea. Some of us may think some of us are too long in the tooth. But those of us who have been on the board a long time will remember the days when virtually every month we had a large lunch to which MPs were invited on a regular basis who had nothing to do with Jews or the Jewish community. And in hearing a guest speaker, be it the Archbishop of Canterbury or whoever we had, it was a marvellous opportunity for those MPs to have their first engagement with the Jewish community, to hear the word shechita, Brit Millar and other expressions which they would never come across. The salient lesson in that, and it was ignored by your predecessor, despite my advising him and others doing so, is that we have to start engaging with MPs of all parties, regardless of whether they have a Jewish community or not, at a very early stage in their parliamentary careers. I have suggested to you, and I will repeat it publicly, you need to start wining and dining MPs along with your colleagues on a regular basis. Expenses paid or not, it's not a matter of concern. What is a matter of concern is that they have to start hearing from the Jewish community. That is the best way to actually engage with MPs rather than all party groups and other exercises. It's vital. And anybody who's been an MP will tell you that when a matter of concern comes up in Parliament, like Shechita or Brit Millar or anything else, that they, having had at least an initial engagement with you privately, it's much easier to go in subsequently to make the points we need to do. I hope you will take that suggestion up. It's been long neglected and we do need to do it. Thank you very much.
Just since Jerry was on can I just say to you, Jerry, actually, I'm not sure about wining and dining. I do know the strength of your view on it, and I'm not ruling it out. Of course, we have found a new forum for engagement with members of Parliament from all parties in the formation 2 years ago, under my predecessor, of the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews, where I think we have actually engaged with more members of Parliament on more issues, including a specific workshop on Shechita. I mention that because you mentioned that subject. Sophie Dunoff will be succeeded shortly by an appointee who will continue that work. And I think that is at least as good, possibly a better way, than inviting MPs to lunch, but I'm fully prepared to consider that possibility as well. Gary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gary Mond, JNF UK. The referendum that is going to take place on the 23rd of June as to whether Britain remains a member of the European Union or not is probably the most significant political event to take place in my lifetime and possibly the lifetime of children and grandchildren. Whether you support us remaining in the European Union or whether you believe that we should leave, the importance of that decision just cannot be understated either way. Now, it is debatable as to whether there are Jewish-specific issues relating to that outcome. I'm fairly confident that in the next few weeks and months, there'll be letters appearing which will state that there are Jewish-related issues. And what I think we should be doing, without taking any policy, and the President is completely correct in saying the board must have no policy on this issue, but having no policy is not the same thing as ignoring the issue. We should not ignore the issue. We've had meetings recently on climate change, on employment policy, and on other areas. There should be a meeting of that nature on the question of Brexit. There should be speakers speaking for Brexit and against Brexit. And to that effect, I would like to ask the board to consider organising such a meeting. The President will know that I do not share his views about manifestos. Perhaps my view is a minority one. I don't actually believe they're useful. But I do believe that meetings of that nature are very useful, and particularly they should get good publicity. Also, perhaps the President might consider such a meeting should be held in conjunction with the Jewish Chronicle or other media outlets. This will show that we are moving with the times, we are taking interest in matters that affect everyone, Jews and non-Jews. It will be a big fillip for the Board of Deputies to organise such a meeting. Thank you.
Lee Lewis, Watford United Synagogue. President, I share the view that you expressed very much in response to Gary Mond's question, that this is not an issue on which the board itself should put forward views or make recommendations. There will be as many views amongst board members as there will be in the country as a whole. I do recognise the importance of the issue. But I wonder if I was alone in being deeply dismayed in seeing George Galloway appear at the Out Leave meeting on Friday evening. And I wonder, President, whether you might consider writing to the Out Leave campaign to register the board's dismay at it giving a platform to Mr. Galloway and asking for it not to do so again. Thank you.
Just questions on this issue. John, did you want to ask a question on this issue? Please do. Jonathan, wait if you would, please. Yes, go on. Please come to the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow deputies, my name is Richard Yoffe, and I'm the deputy of Exeter Hebrew Congregation. In contemplating whether we should exit or stay within Europe, let us consider how Israel's relationship with Europe and the European Union could perhaps be strengthened if we are a strong partner within Europe. If we're not there, it could well be that Israel's relationship within the European Union could suffer. And Mr. President, could I ask you a question, if I may? There is one asset in our country, that one Israeli asset, which should be used. The name is Mark Regev. We all know him. We've seen him as the spokesman of Israel over many occasions. He is now the ambassador in the United Kingdom. Surely let him come up on television from time to time and answer as he would, concisely and clearly, on the policies of the State of Israel, and he will do a great job. Thank you.
Jonathan Davis, Golders Green Synagogue. In considering saying anything on the issue of Europe and Britain's membership of the EU, will the board speak with the other Jewish communities of the European Union and consider what effect Britain's withdrawal might have on those communities?
Well, thank you all. You see, you've got a very good dress rehearsal. There are some very, very useful points made by Jonathan, made by Gary, and by Lee Lewis and Richard Yoffe. And we're going to hear more of these points, and it's a great discussion to have, and the board will consider all its options. We'll certainly look into the attendance by George Galloway at the out occasion. We'll take that within the staff of the board. Mark Regev has been appointed the ambassador, but he's not here yet. I have assured deputies that he will, amongst his first common or engagements, be addressing the board. And if only I had a date, I would be able to firm that up, but we don't yet have that date. But I think it quite likely that he'll be addressing the May meeting of the Board of Deputies, which is the meeting that that the ambassador of the state usually addresses because it's the closest to Yom Ha'atzmaut. David Farby, I've answered your question. Have you got anything to add to it? I'm going to just say this. David Farby points to a senior level communications director as part of a series of appointments of the JLC. And I welcome Bernard Williams' appointment. He's a very, very nice man. I would just say this, and please do not misinterpret this in any way. I'm talking about the board, not the JLC. We have our own, of course, superb communications officer in Simon Round, who I think is here today. Oh, he's right in front of me, thank you. You know, David, senior level communications director or not, just take a look at the Jewish press this week. Look at the stories. Look who is leading the stories week after week. We're doing a great job out there. The board is very much leading the Jewish communal agenda, just as it should be. And I think we should look at facts and worry much less about fears. Yes, David.
Good morning, or it's now afternoon. David Farby Finchley reform. I hadn't intended to speak on this particular matter, but I think there was a ever so slightly implied criticism of my question from the President. It wasn't intended to be a criticism of the board, and it wasn't intended to be derogatory. All that happened was last meeting we had a long debate about the JLC. It's quite clear most of us don't know what the JLC is doing, particularly the new deputies, and I thought to clarify matters it would be rather nice if we were told what they did and how they did it. It's not to compare them with us, it's not to say our communications are worse or better, it's merely to clarify what they're about. And I think in future debates on the JLC, again, we should know rather more precisely what they are, what they do, so that we are much better informed. Thank you.
And David, I certainly implied no criticism of the question at all. And yes, you ask a very pertinent question. Paul Edlin's question has been answered. Paul, I hope that question was answered. Follow up to Lawrence Julius. Yeah. To Paul's question, yes, indeed.
Lawrence Julius, Holland Park, Spanish and Portuguese. I think Paul has raised a very interesting point about empowerment of deputies and empowerment of a new generation of deputies. It would be useful if they could explain why the international division wasn't asked to nominate representatives and why deputies weren't picked from the new up and coming generation. I think the same issue applies to when we have visits at embassies, visits with governments. It seems to be the staff and the executive and deputies from the previous generation who tend to monopolise these without involving the next generation. It's not a criticism, Jonathan. It's just I think we need to empower more people.
Thank you. Andrew, while Andrew's coming, let me just say that's really a question for Richard, not me, but there's a bit more about it in the international division. And some people who've previously been delegates are delegates to the end of their term. There's a rule about it. Andrew Gilbert?
I think the point and question asked by Paul Edlin is something that, Mr. President, you might care to look at how deputies are used. And I particularly want to praise Edwin Shuker, who had played a sterling role on the executive of the EJC, and I didn't see the fact of, and I know it was in your decision whether he restood or not on behalf of our community. I wonder how you will try. I know you work incredibly hard for the board, spend 25/8, if anything, of your time, but there are a lot of incredible deputies around in our community that we are honoured to have in this room. And I would urge you perhaps, and I know your efforts are tightened, to try to share a little bit more, not just with your top table of honorary officers, and not just with the executive, but wider deputies in the work that's done. Not everyone can do as much as you do, Mr. President, but I do think that some ways, even Mr. Edlin's question alludes to it, I think there possibly needs to be greater empowerment, and we are too reliant sometimes on the amount that you're taking on. And I would urge perhaps more sharing if you could, and I just would like to reflect a little particularly on that. And also, I just wanted you to mention Edwin Shuker's role at the AJC.
Thank you very much. Well, as you've seen, now that some of the existing delegates have reached the end of their terms, there will, by definition, be new delegates taking their place, and the international division will have a part to play in influencing who they are. Paul Edlin. Deputies, I do need to hurry this up and reach the end of this report by 1:45.
Paul Edlin, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council. I hoped not to have to add a supplementary to my point. I think you mentioned members of the EJC still in their term, or at the end of their term. The actual fact of the matter was 3 of the representatives, I'm prepared to name them, but they know who they are not current members of the EJC. They're friends or acquaintances of Moshe Kantor, the President, who could have had them come without being part of the board delegation. There was no reason why 3 more junior members of the International Division, or indeed rank-and-file deputies, could not have gone. The consultation process was not applied here, and it has not applied when the visits to the embassy happen. I've raised the point, and I hope you will hear from the strength of feelings from other deputies that this is something that does need to be addressed.
Thank you. Just moving on through the questions, Leila Cumber's question we've answered. Amos Schonfield's questions we've answered. Very happy to endorse blood donation. I've myself been a blood donor for many, many years. Bone marrow donation, organ donation, wherever possible. Lawrence Judith's question on the BBC Charter, I think we've answered. And on the destruction of heritage sites of Jewish interest in Iraq, Howard Erdunas' question, I think we've not only answered, but put it into practice. I think we'll continue to move along and we'll continue to hear feedback. Elliot Jabril's question, I think the first two questions we've answered. And we're nearly there. I'll leave Elliot's final question for the end, if I may. And Brian Bloom's question from Ajax about visit to the Serbian embassy, I think we have also answered. Elliot's question, Elliot Jabril, is Elliot here today? Elliot, there you are. Elliot asked where he can find transparency data on gifts received by the President and honorary officers as part of their official roles. And Elliot, you will have seen my answer, and I said that in the interest of complete transparency, I shall bring to the board meeting the most recent items presented to me. And deputies, I'm very pleased indeed to have been presented in Liverpool with this book of the story of Liverpool in caricatures. And I was very pleased to have been presented in Newcastle with this book on the visions of Newcastle, beautiful pictures of Newcastle upon Tyne. I've been told by other honorary officers that on occasion they have received bottles of wine that are no longer available, I'm afraid, for... But I'd like to say to Elliot, if Elliot is particularly concerned about this and would like to begin a register of gifts, Elliot, I'll be only too pleased to accept your volunteerism in that regard. Abalor.
Elliot Jabril, Deputy for Hampscon South Synagogue, Norris Lee. Thank you for your very full answer and kind of show and tell as part of that. I guess part of the question is also beyond actual physical gifts, but flights, things like that, being taken as part of a delegation, things of that sort. And I don't know whether that has impacted how the Board of Deputies are supporting individuals in elections. One example that comes to mind, that just putting two bits of information that I've heard, is being taken as part of the delegation to see President Putin on a private jet and then potentially nominating that same person for re-election of the presidency of the European Jewish Congress. So it's things like that. And I ask, as a serious point in a democratic body, it's important that we have these clear accountabilities and that we show where we are getting gifts. I'd expect deputies to do the same. Honorary officers, particularly as trustees of the organisation, having that legal responsibility, I'd expect to see a clear register of interest and a cut-off point. So if a gift was above a certain amount, I'd expect it to either not be able to be accepted or to be used for the board as a whole. The basic governance things, and that's all I was asking.
It's a perfectly serious point, and I took it perfectly seriously. Let me just assure you that, the truth is the EJC is substantially funded by Moshe Kantor. The World Jewish Congress is very considerably funded by Ronald Lauder. There are some times when we go that the fare is met by the EJC as part of our subscription, or sometimes it's met by the EJC full stop. But let me assure deputies, if the EJC offers me a flight to go to Moscow, I went on commercial actually and came back on a plane which Mr. Kantor chartered for the delegation, it would not influence me one moment in who I may choose to support in any contested election. Moshe Kantor was recently re-elected as president of EJC, and his position was not in fact contested. So even if I'd wanted to vote for someone else, there wasn't the opportunity to have done so. Finally, any other questions on the President's statement? We'll have to be fairly brief. I can see Ivan Lawrence, yes.
Ivan Lawrence, Northwest Surrey. You mentioned in your statement the very sad death of the last survivor of Treblinka, and you went on to say that this indicated something to us. I'm a trustee of the Holocaust Educational Trust and have been for a number of years, and I seem to remember that we regularly had a speaker, the chief executive or the chairman from the Holocaust Educational Trust to come to a plenary of the board and explain what work was being done and how it was important to enlist members of the board into the work of the trust. It's many years since we've had such a speaker, and therefore I'm asking if you would consider inviting the chief executive to come and give us a statement and subject herself to questions about the work of the Holocaust Trust, which is going to carry on being vitally important as very sadly and tragically the survivors leave us.
It's a very good idea. More than happy to take it on board. Thank you very much, Mike.
Mike Samuel, South Manchester Synagogue. I don't know if this is absolutely the right time to bring this up, but the Labour MP Ivan Lewis is putting up to be the first elected mayor of Manchester. Manchester's made up of 10 boroughs, each one has its own mayor. And Ivan is putting up, he's announced that he's going to be a candidate to be the first elected mayor, the Boris Johnson of Manchester. It's very significant because Manchester's a very diverse communities, 30,000 or so Jews, a lot more of many other different denominations. Only Manchester people can vote, obviously, but it would be very interesting if deputies could support Ivan online, on Twitter, Facebook or whatever, to show solidarity so that he's got a good chance of becoming the mouthpiece for Manchester. And it would be a wonderful thing to have a Jewish elected Lord Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last question.
Thanks, Dan Grabina, Movement from Judaism. Thank you for your President's statement, as usual. I was hoping that maybe moving forward you might find a slightly more succinct way to deliver it. I read the President's report. I found a lot of it quite valuable. I know the questions are valuable. But at the same time, we've now had an hour and a half of kind of hearing what you wrote, and we're now going to fly through the last bit of the meeting, which I know is often the more valuable bit, which many of us don't get privileged to read or respond to in the same way. So perhaps moving forward, we could find a more succinct way to do it or put a slightly shorter time limit on it. Thanks.
Moving on to the Executive Committee report. I don't think there's anything in the Executive Committee report that hasn't already been trialled or will be mentioned shortly. So I propose to move on past that report unless anyone has a matter to raise specifically that hasn't been raised before. Lionel, did you...
Well, Lionel Koplowitz, Senior Past President. Mr. President, the only point I'd like to raise is regarding the reference in the Executive Committee report to the meeting with Mr. Cameron, the Prime Minister, in which you refer to the forthcoming centenary of the Balfour Declaration in November 2017, and that many people much is already going on in regard to the celebration. Well, you know that I've heard all sorts of people are trying to jump on this particular bandwagon and to be involved, but I think people should know what the Balfour Declaration said. When Arthur James Balfour drafted, on behalf of the government, the Balfour Declaration, it was addressed to the second Lord Rothschild. And the concluding sentence in the declaration was, I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the attention of the Zionist Federation. No other organization is mentioned at all, just the Zionist Federation. And therefore I do hope that when you take part in these discussions, that pride of place must be given in any celebration or celebrations to the part to be played by the present Lord Rothschild and also by the current president of the Zionist Federation.
I can confirm that Lord Rothschild will be part of it, and so will the Zionist Federation. And times have moved on, and we're 100 years on now, and organisations in our community have also moved on with it. Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite the divisional reports and ask if anyone first has questions on the Community Issues Division, which Vice President Sheila Giewald will introduce.
Thank you. Yes, I'm proud to present my report. Thanks again to Jackie for all her hard work in helping me present this. She's part-time at the board. She does amazing stuff. Thank you, Jackie. I'd like to draw your attention, please, to something that was actually mentioned in the executive report. On the second page, the second item down, I would like to change the divisional name. We have discussed this. The executive are happy for the new proposal that was voted on by divisional members, that we change the name from Community Issues Division to Community and Education. Education is a core part of the work of the division, and it has been, and it has been, it was voted in the divisional meeting that this is what we would like to be called. Apparently, this can proceed to be accepted if we have the consensus at this meeting. So if you're against this decision, will you please raise your hand? Thank you for your support. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions now on the rest of my report.
Good morning, Sheila. My name is Jeremy Michelson. I represent Manchester Great New and Central Synagogue. A few weeks ago, you and Sarah Perlmutter and Sandra Teacher had a meeting with Linda Woodhead and Charles Clark, who published an important report on the place of religion in schools. And it says said in your report that you put forward the Jewish point of view. Well, what was the Jewish point of view? In other words, it's quite a difficult report. It's an interesting report. There are certain aspects of it that might not actually seem obvious that there should be a Jewish point of view. Like, for example, they want to, the recommendation, for example, is to abolish the statutory provision, statutory requirement to have daily acts of worship in schools. Now, you might think to yourself, well, this won't actually affect the Jews at all. But in my opinion, where we see a continued weakening of Britain's Christian roots, which are an important part of their history and cultural background, sooner or later, this is going to lead to problems for the Jewish community and others, because where a nation is unhappy, where it's divorced from its own roots, then they tend to, in the words of Michael Burley, the historian of the Third Reich, develop a hatred for other people's beliefs. And when they see Jews and Muslims and others walking confidently about knowing what their history and culture is, and they are themselves less aware of their own, then that's where you start to get extremism. Oh, it's another reason for extremism. So what I'm saying is this. Could you please produce a very short bullet point page on what were the Jewish community's response? And in future, where you know that you've got, say, a month and you're going to have an important meeting with, on a particular report or a particular issue with government, would it not be a good idea to put out a consultation, just a question for consultation to members of the community and education division, which would give, say, a week for us to respond, where you might get ideas from us that maybe you know, with us who have also had a lot of involvement in education.
On red, Jeremy, thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. Thank you for that important question. Yeah, I can reassure you in the first instance that the meeting we had was one of a series of consultations about this paper that was written by Charles Clarke, who was the ex-Secretary for Education, and Linda Woodhead from Lancaster University, who is a religious expert and authority. This paper has been written, it's been commissioned by the government, and this is they are going to all the faith groups, and it's out for consultation. They came to us, and we were very happy to meet with them. There has been a lot of concern about this because, as you say, they've made various suggestions that challenge the way faith is taught and is carried out in schools. But what I do have to say, first of all, they were very responsive and very receptive to the Jewish view that we had, as you say, is that Judaism is continued to be part of the religious education curriculum, that at the moment is organised through the SACRES, that's the Standing Advisory Committee for Religious Education on every local authority. The report from Clarke and Woodhead suggests that perhaps this should now be a national curriculum, that it raises the level of RE teaching in schools. There's been a lot of nervousness about this from the SACRES, that it would do away with their authority. It would not do away with their authority. A national curriculum imposed centrally by government raises their profile, because then they are in a position to have to assist with the resources for this teaching. As to your suggestion that we have a bullet point report on this, I'm happy to have something in the next Community Issues Division report about the outcomes of that meeting. I don't think it warrants a whole paper or a whole consultation, because this was the first in a series of consultations. I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Martin Jaskell, Hampstead Garden Sabbath Synagogue. I'd like to pay tribute to the work on the Jewish living tours. We have personal experience. My great niece was part of the 35 kids that came from North Waltham School, which is in Basingstoke. She's the only Jewish girl in the school. They visited Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue, and I can tell deputies that this was a really formative moment for all the kids and the staff on that visit. They were very impressed by the shul. They were very impressed by meeting all the kids at Kerem School, where they had lunch. And the children have come back and have been telling all their fellow students how wonderful it is to be Jewish.
Thank you.
Many congratulations.
Thank you. Can I just explain, this wasn't actually the exhibition, this was a tour of younger pupils. Normally the Jewish tours have 15, 16, 17-year-old GCSE students studying religious education with Judaism as an aspect of that. We bring them into Northwest London for a whole day. They do a synagogue, they have Jewish meal, they go to a Jewish school and share a lesson. This was a different tour. This was younger primary children who were hosted by the school attached to the synagogue. And as you can say, it was a really positive experience. My grandson, thank you for the congratulations, goes to a school where he's the only boy who's Jewish in 1,200 children. And this school has never experienced the situation before where one of their members, one of their students is having a bar mitzvah. It's very exciting for everybody in the whole school. And we need to get out there and spread the word and let everybody know that we're proud and loud about being Jewish, and we're happy to teach other people. Thank you. Sorry, another question. I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Sid. Sorry. Yes, last question, please. We have to move on. Thank you, Sid. No, don't run. It's okay. Thank you.
Sid Braham from Barnet Synagogue. As a volunteer who takes part in these JLT events, can I just endorse what's been said very, very quickly? These kids come from regions where very often they don't see any Jewish people, don't have any interaction with Jewish people, but they come with fears and negative vibes. And we had one particular case, just for a few seconds, if I may,
sure,
on where a young lass came as part of a tour, and she was a fully subscribed member, it seemed, of the anti-Shechita, pro-vegetarian, etc. lobby. And I do really feel that she went away knowing a lot more and was better informed about our position than had she not come up and had we not had these events. So it is a fantastic opportunity, and glad to be able to take part in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Sid. Thank you.
Can we move to the F&O division? Questions to Stuart. Do you want to come to the microphone?
Just while we're waiting for people to come to the microphone, a couple things. One of them is that in Richard Verber's absence, if we have time for any working groups at all, then Simon Hockhauser has very generously stepped up to the plate, and he will chair the working group that Richard was going to chair. This is really just one of the final phases of consultation with you in case any of you have ideas that we haven't been aware of yet, and if you have any questions. Concrete proposals have begun to be rolled out, and in due course you will get a clear view of all of those. That's what I want to say on that score. On another score, I just wanted to mention on the back of a conversation I had with Paul Edlin over the last few days, it's not in the F&O report, that if you are interested in... I'm sorry if you couldn't hear what I was saying. If you're interested in getting involved in any fundraising activity on a regional level, please have a word with Paul in the first instance. Please fire away with any questions you have.
Mervyn Smith, Sutton. This is an old chestnut that I've raised over now a year and a half with the lack of information that's provided to deputies in respect of the board's finances. Since the middle part of 2014, I've still not received, nor has any deputy to my knowledge, received any tangible information in respect of be it budgets or be it accounts relating to the board's funds. I report at the Schule board meetings for Sutton every month on the activity within the board, and I've said it with pride in respect of all the various committees. The one committee that I've left out has been the F&O, because I've got absolutely nothing to say about it. And if I have to say something, it's going to be discrediting in respect of an organisation which is a leader in looking after the affairs of the Jewish community. We understand that there has now been a budget for 2016. On that basis, it should have been made available to the deputies, not just perhaps to those who attended the meeting of the division on January the 19th. I had hoped to attend but wasn't able to. We've still not received or seen any figures with regard to 2015, so it's very difficult to quantify the importance of the increases in income which is necessary, what expenditure is attributable as deductions in respect of that income. We have a dinner coming up, and everybody is being asked, and it was the present treasurer who stated in his response to the question.
Mervyn, I'm sorry you're on amber.
Fine, thanks. That everybody should be contributing, quite rightly, £250 per head or per couple. However, without any information, we are derelict in the conduct of this organisation's affairs. And I would like to be able to report something tangible, a little bit of tactless, as far as the finances of the Board of Deputies is concerned.
Mervyn, very quickly, we were going to have a workshop possibly today about this, except that it wasn't altogether clear that we would get the budgets cleared. They have been cleared in the meantime, and we're intending in Sheffield to have a workshop, and if necessary, if there aren't enough people there, we'll repeat it at the next London board meeting.
What about all the deputies, not just those who attend a workshop?
Excuse me, could you let me finish the answer? What I'd like to say is that I'm entirely happy to have you come to me and see the budget, if you will. We're not going to put it out on the out in the public domain fully any more than any other organisation would do so. But I'll tell you that we're looking at a turnover of about 1.4 million sterling, and we're looking at a reduction in the board's deficit from last year of nearly 50%, largely because of the savings that we've managed to make over the last year. You're welcome to come and see me to get more information about this.
If I may say...
And also, we are intending before the middle of the year to actually give deputies the accounts. It's not like you're going to have no information at all.
If I may say, when I first raised this a year and a half ago, the previous incumbent I referred to as having prepared a woolly report, and we haven't changed a bit since then. And I know you're just into the task, and hopefully you'll produce tangible information so that deputies know exactly what is happening with regard to the funds.
That's precisely why we're going to have those meetings, and people are welcome to come to them. You're welcome to come and see me after this. Although I'll just remind people who are involved in the management of our investment that we're going to have a meeting immediately after this. And I think we're a bit short of time, are we not?
Anthony Epstein, Hadley Wood. Mr. Chairman, I'm not clear as to why the figures would not be disclosed to all deputies as with any other organisation.
We don't have a hang-up about giving you the headline figures on a turnover of 1.4 million that's anticipated for the coming year. We'll have cut the deficit from 230 to 125,000, of which about 40,000 is subject to the specific expenditure items being specifically funded. So I think that we've made tremendous progress since last May in terms of getting ourselves towards running on an even keel.
Are there any other questions for Stuart? Jerry, I'd really like to move on. Can I just say to deputies, as far as I'm recollect, you know, the budget is a document, it's a projection which goes through the Finance and Organisation Committee. The responsibility of the honorary officers as trustees is to put the accounts before the board, and it's a constitutional requirement as well as a legal requirement, and that's exactly what happens. It's in the accounts that you see the projections for the following year, and that's what we do. If you really want to drill down to the level of budget, people are welcome to attend the Finance and Organisation Committee, but I don't think actually it would really be a very profitable use of our time to be discussing budgets. I'm very happy if people really want to have the budgets and to go through these things at meetings. We're already short of time. We're now running into the time for workshops. I think that's something for people to come to the F&O if they would like to do, and everyone is welcome. I hope that answers the point. Jerry, leave it to the end if you would. Can we just see how we go on time? We don't have Richard here to respond to the international division as he's recuperating. If there's any particular questions that people really want to put urgently now, they could, or I would suggest they be emailed to David Walsh, the international officer, or to Richard, and they'll be responded to. I think many of the matters we've already adverted to. And Robert, is this about the international division? Yeah.
This is the second occasion, Mr. President. Oh, Robert Stone, Fisher Reform Synagogue. This is the second occasion on which an honorary officer has not been here for one reason, and the vice chair elected by that division has not answered questions. If the chair of a division is not here, the vice chair should answer the questions.
The vice chair is abroad travelling. Richard did not make a planned absence today because he had surgery. He was absent last time because he had an illness that was probably connected with the surgery. I'm really sorry, but the best we could do is that he went down on Tuesday and Edwin already had his plans. I'm sorry. Do you want me to resign? I'm sorry. Marie can't be here, again, very much unplanned. There is a full report of defence and group relations, some of the things we've already touched on. I think what I'm going to invite deputies to do, if they would, if there are any questions, to put them on email. Laura, did you have one now? On defence. I mean, I may not be able to answer it because Marie's not here, but we'll try our best if you want to come up to the front.
Good afternoon, Laura Marks, MRJ. It's not really a question, it's really a request and a point of information, which is that in the defence report, it talked about things that the staff are doing on interfaith issues, but it didn't talk about Nisan Hashim, which is a board-funded initiative to bring the Jews and Muslim communities together through the women. And it was in the community briefing this week, but I particularly wanted to raise it because I wanted to send out an appeal to all of the women here. We've already got groups set up in London, various parts of London, Harrow and South Manchester. And there's been a lot of interest in setting up groups in Bournemouth, South West London, Leeds, Newcastle, Brighton, Bristol and Watford. But if there are any female deputies who feel they would like to get involved in setting up groups in their local areas, which is all about bringing the two communities together through the women, fostering leadership skills in the women and doing some good for society along the way, we'd be really interested to hear from you. So either contact me or Leah Warren, who's the project manager at the board. Thank you very much.
I'd really like to move things forward, deputies, if you'll give, because otherwise we'll end up with simply no time for the workshops. There'll be fewer workshops and they may be a bit shorter, but they should be none the worse for that. You have a paper in front of you where there was a discussion going to be led by Richard, who can't be here. In fact, the paper was not intended for immediate discussion, but to invite ideas. You'll see the governance review and a paper to deputies where there will be part of that will be the subject of a workshop led by Simon Hochhauser in Richard's absence, and I thank Simon for that. But I would invite deputies to look at the three parts of that, empowering deputies to represent their constituencies better. I think there's a wide gap in patchy observance of how deputies actually relate to their own constituencies. The second one is the structure of the boards, which we have to refresh, and the third is a technical or legal matter about compliance with regulations. They're all important. We welcome input on all of them. If there's no immediate questions on that, can I, before we break, just mention two matters. First is that the President's dinner approaches. The invitations will be going out very shortly. We are looking forward to another successful dinner. It needs to be successful, otherwise we will not have the funds to operate. As I said before, we understand that it is not for absolutely everyone, but we hope that as many deputies as possible will come and support the dinner. Otherwise, we can't be as credible as we should be if deputies themselves don't support the dinner, but it will be a really, really good occasion, as it has been in the past. It will inspire, it will gain us support, and it will help to raise us funds. Please, please support us. And finally, ask you to support the regional weekend in Sheffield. Can't put it off any longer now. 4 weeks' time, we are looking forward to convening at our regional meeting in Sheffield. Sheffield is one of the most central locations in the country for most people. I know that some people will say, well, coming from where I do, it's very hard to get to. We try and meet in the north one year, followed by meeting towards the south in the other year. We've had a very successful regional weekend in Sheffield before, and thanks to our deputies from Sheffield, and I think Roy Lewis was here, we will be having a very good weekend. It's always a good social weekend. It's a weekend where we're privileged to be in a regional community and find out at first hand what happens there, but also just to be able to talk to each other in relaxed surroundings over Shabbat meals. and there'll be different services at the different schools. Please book up now, make it a success, and there'll be a coach, I think, from London on Sunday, which will be free of charge. So we hope that as many of you as possible, if you can't make it for Shabbat, will come to the board meeting. I think I may have admitted earlier to ask deputies whether they had any corrections to the minutes of the last meeting. We haven't received any. Is that Roger? Do you have a correction, Roger? Oh, I was. Roger has reminded me there was one error. Thank you, Roger. I had been quoted as saying that under the past president had approved the use of the phrase disputed territories in relation to territories which Israel has been in occupation of or possession of since the 1967 war. It's been pointed out to me by the past president that the phrase that he used was simply the territories or the administered territories, but not the disputed territories. I'm very happy to make that correction. I'm also happy in future, in a completely neutral way and without putting in any political overtones on it, to adopt the phrase the territories or the administered territories, which the past president tells me has been the phrase used before. And everyone else can use their own phraseology, and we'll leave it at there. Before we break for workshops, I don't know if there's any other business. There are going to be 3 workshops at different places. I will take not a statement but a surgery on anything's for me, and I'll be at this corner front, looking from where you are, the front left. Sheila Giewald will be looking ahead for the President's dinner, projects to raise funds for the board, perhaps towards the right-hand side of the hall, and Simon Hochhauser, proposals for refreshing the Constitution, perhaps towards there on your left-hand side. I can see Deanna Levine. Deanna, I'm going to give you first, and then Jerry, you can have the last word.
Sorry, and the investment working group, we are going to go round that away, so if we could meet over by that column, please.
Deanna?
Thank you. Deanna Levine, Deputy for B'nai B'rith UK. The Claims Conference gets a lot of criticism, normally for financial reasons. When I proudly told a deputy, a Holocaust survivor, that my son, Professor Stephen Levine of Haifa University, had obtained some funding from the Claims Conference for a research project about Holocaust survivors and schizophrenia, I was met with the frosty and angry response that the Claims Conference should be for survivors, not education or research. The comprehensive research study, which Stephen led, showed that Holocaust survivors, including those born during it, are at significantly increased risk of developing schizophrenia because of their exposure to the extreme physical, social, and psychological adversities of the Holocaust. While I can understand the view that money for the Claims Conference should only be used for survivors, it's important also to be aware of the benefits that can ensue from research for survivors and others. Incidentally, Claims Conference funding of research always has to be matched by the same amount from the university. The Claims Conference provides research grants to universities for programs of Holocaust education and documentation in order to ensure that the memory and lessons of the Holocaust are preserved for current and future generations. Through its contributions to Holocaust-related research and publication, the Claims Conference has helped to expand what is known about the Holocaust and in particular has facilitated the preservation of that knowledge. And in addition, research may well assist medical understanding and treatment of the few survivors who are left, as in the case of schizophrenia. And it is also likely to assist medical understanding and treatment of survivors of other genocides. Interestingly, Stephen told me that a child of a Holocaust survivor commented to him that this research was most reassuring
Deanna,
because
you'll
he
have
was
to conclude.
convinced that his parents were insane. So I put it to you that research funding is a most positive and beneficial use for limited amounts of claims conference money. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry.
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue, and apologies for delaying you for a moment or two. I just wanted to point out to you, and I'm sorry the Treasurer's had to leave for a moment, I am very concerned at the comments you made a few moments ago concerning the budget and the whole issue of financial documentation. Whilst you are technically correct that only the accounts are presented to the board, with all due respect, we always used to have the budgetary figures. And the whole idea of publishing the budgetary figures is that those of us who disagree and feel that the budget should be better spent in other directions, and we have that right under accountability and transparency, should have the opportunity to say so to you on the top table. And it's worse than that. May I just point out, I've been invited by Sheila to participate in getting the money towards the Media Awards, which I'm thrilled is going to be revived. And it's something which every deputy can easily get involved in. And to be here told that there is no money coming from the central authority of the board, there's no money for projects like that, worries me very deeply. We have £4+ million sitting in the bank. I do not understand how it is we do not have the opportunity to spend money where it's going to be useful to promote the board. And it's even more difficult than that. I was the first person at the board, at the executive, to suggest we moved out of number 6 Bloomsbury to a better premises. I have no idea why we're not spending some money to find premises rather than sitting in the UJA in a difficult place in in Kentish Town. We should be moving to our own premises and looking after ourselves and spending a bit of money to promote the board. I find it very wrong that the budget isn't available, and I think on behalf of all of us deputies, we need to see the figures. The other figures are long overdue. We need a definite change in the approach on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry. We'll certainly consider that. Can we move now for the last 20 minutes for the working groups? And I will say we won't have a formal coming together afterwards, but thank you very much. Once again, a really excellent attendance at the board meeting. Look forward to seeing you next month in Sheffield.